their faces in golden rays.
As he put the key in the door, David could hear voices inside the pub, so he instantly reached for his shotgun. To his surprise, he found Jingfo sitting at the bar, talking animatedly to a very gaunt and strange-looking man, whom she introduced as Klutzo. In his mind, David thought the man would more appropriately have been named the Thin White Duke. They were talking about the formatting centre which Klutzo had recently escaped from, and he was telling Jingfo about the communal area, where all the inmates were allowed to gather for an hour every evening. The room was overlooked by a huge platinum screen, which no one was allowed to switch off, and the same programme ran constantly day and night. The programme was a documentary featuring prominent starmen and explaining their various scientific and technological achievements and breakthroughs. Klutzo also said that although everyone was boring and lifeless after they'd gone through the formatting process, some of the characters there actually would have been better off having gone through it, like one American woman he had met, who kept complaining about the fact that you couldn't buy an ice cream or frozen pizza, or the Polish lady who kept wondering how anyone could live without having aperitifs before dinner. David found the topic interesting, but it was soon becoming obvious that Klutzo was not going to just settle for 1 pint, and he must be at least on his fifth, David reckoned. He was not used to company other than Jingfo's, and needed to be alone to have sex with her, which he had now been deprived of for so many days, and this guy's presence was getting on his already shot nerves. David was determined not to let Klutzo intimidate him, when after all he himself was a man who had looked the Shadow Man straight in the face a few hours previously. He acknowledged it would be cruel to throw Klutzo out onto the rat-infested streets, so decided to start pouring him generous helpings of whisky instead. Soon he had achieved his goal, and Klutzo was crushed out and snoring on the counter. He found making love to Jingfo was a great relief from all the stress he had been under, and was glad she was willing to do it as often as he wished. After their uplifting encounter, David felt quite shattered, though somehow regenerated, and composed a song called No Control, the words of which seemed so apt, given the all too recent harrowing experiences. Stay away from the future. Don't tell God your plans. It's all deranged. No control.
If I could control tomorrow's haze, the darkest shore would not bother me. If I can't control the web we weave, my life will be lost in falling leaves. Every single move's uncertain. Don't tell God your plans, it's all deranged. No control.
When he finished composing the song, David went to lie down beside Jingfo. Klutzo was still snoring and laid out on the bar with his head on his hands. Jingfo had thrown a blanket over him, something which David could not imagine he would have done himself. He was wondering how they would eventually get rid of Klutzo. If he was as fond of the drink as he proved the night before, there would be no hope of him going anywhere else sometime soon. David's worries about how to get rid of Klutzo proved to be superfluous, because the next morning they woke up to 3 starmen hovering above the table in the centre of the pub. One lifted his finger, and his words flashed into all their minds. We have come to take you to the formatting centre. You have 1 hour to get your things together. Remember, there is no point in trying to escape, because we are aware of your whereabouts at all times. As soon as they left, Jingfo started crying and asked what would become of them. David put his arm around her in a vain effort to comfort her, but the thoughts of being formatted frightened him. He could be convinced to be subjected to severe physical pain, but someone messing with his mind, well, that was another thing. Instead of rushing around like Jingfo and gathering his very few garments together, David sat and wrote a song called Loving the Alien. Torture comes and torture goes. Knights who give you anything. They bear the cross of Coeur de Lion, salvation for the miracle. The Starmen were back in an hour as promised and invited them into the pyramid. They were all mentally prepared for taking off, but it never happened, and the next second they were standing in the bright communal room of the formatting centre. There were lots of huge glass windows everywhere in the dome-shaped formatting centre. Klotso told them it had purposely been created to seem light and spacious so that people got the illusion of a sense of freedom, and those that had been formatted truly believed themselves to be free. The first thing the Starmen did was separate all three of them, and they were taken away by guards to get fitted out in their uniforms and wear a microchip photo of themselves around their necks, hanging from a piece of bright blue cord. Not everyone in the centre had been formatted yet. You could easily tell those who weren't from those that were. The ones who hadn't been through the process still had some form of compassion, which would light up in their eyes from time to time, whereas the formatted ones had a dead, dull look and rarely smiled, or if they did, only with their lips. When one of the inmates, who was a security guard, pushed him and Jingfo through the gates out of the communal room too roughly, one of the still unformatted inmates, Sabine, objected, but was quickly silenced. Empathy was another trait everyone lost after having been formatted, but obviously only those who had possessed any in the first place. David knew there had been far too many sociopaths walking around before the planetary impact, when everything had been flung into chaos. Sabine had a soft-spoken Irish accent and was nice to chat to. Though a poet, she had never received any public acclaim for her work. Some of her poems were very good, and David and Jingfo enjoyed listening to them during the evening, in which they were all allowed to mix socially for an hour. David felt sad that Sabine was going to get formatted, and that all her lyrical and flowing poetry would from then on be lost to mankind forever. One evening, Sabine said to them, "Look, guys, in any case, before things were turned upside down, and when life had been termed as being normal, I already considered myself a slave and working full-time on extremely tedious administrative tasks for employers who never understood or cared that I needed something creative to do. And most of my salary went on paying off debts and a mortgage." But she was easy to talk to, unlike the American woman who was still complaining about the lack of frozen pizza, and who David hoped the Starmen would get round to formatting as soon as possible. At least the Polish woman seemed to shut up, Klutzo observed, and there wasn't any more mention of aperitifs. They heard she had been formatted a week ago and was already showing promising signs of being an excellent security guard. The only people who really seemed to enjoy any job satisfaction in the centre were the lawyers, who were running around taking discriminatory notes about everyone, which they could, if necessary, use against you in the formatting courtroom. The more focused and obsessed you were in the task assigned to you, the greater estimation you gained in the Starmen's eyes. Anyone whose thoughts started straying from the job in hand would be sent into the punishment area, where you would be seated in the middle of the room, stared at continuously by 4 Starmen, who sat at each corner of the room, and release tiny magnetic pulses all over your body until the formatting process had kicked in properly again. Everyone was allowed to hold their own religious and political views, as long as they never mentioned them in public or discussed them with anyone else. Klutzow told them that it was rumoured a handful of American inmates met up secretly at night to read their Bibles and would be exterminated if they were ever found out. David personally held a secret, unvoiced disdain for the Americans and wondered why he had to find himself surrounded by so many of them. The Polish lady had an overdeveloped propensity for sleeping around with lots of different men, which was highly approved of and got a quick promotion and extra points in the Starman scheme. The Starmen had unanimously agreed that Jingfol and David were far too close and assigned them both various partners to sleep with to encourage them to get used to breaking the close rein of their connection. But David didn't enjoy sleeping with the formatted women. There was no wailing or moaning with blind passion, as he had been used to with Jingfol, and he often felt forced to close his eyes to be able to conclude the performance. Every time one of the robotic women arrived at his bedroom cell door, he felt under acute pressure and highly uncomfortable. One night after the umpteenth mechanical experience, he sang a song on his guitar about how frustrated he felt. Pressure pushing down on me, pressing down on you. No man asked for, and this is our last dance. This is ourselves, under pressure.
Pressure pushing down on me, pressing down on you. No man has for. Under pressure, the burns are building down, strips the family in two, puts people on streets. Eat it up, that's okay. It's the terror of knowing what this world is about. Watching some good friends when you let me out. Tomorrow gets me higher. Pressure on people on streets.
Due to the fact that it used up a lot of energy, the Starman only formatted 10 people a night, except in the case of emergency, such as a huge influx of inmates in one go, following a pyramid search. Getting formatted involved walking between 2 tall columns, like the ones you walk through in security at an airport, except no one asks you to go back and take your shoes off to prove you're not a criminal. From the communal area into what looked like an ambience of bottomless white air, Jingfol told David she was afraid of walking into the cloud, as she might fall down and disappear forever. But nobody ever did disappear, and a few moments after having walked through the columns, the subject of the formatting was back in the room, with a glazed look in their eyes, and their skin having been turned slightly grey. They felt sad on the night that Sabine was formatted, and that her destiny would be to join the other inhuman inmates. In a spurt of callousness, the Starmen decided that Sabine should work as a secretary and deal only with the wretched procedures she had always hated, though after the formatting she surprisingly proved to be excellent at this job. During their social interaction time with the others in the communal room of the centre, David and Jingfol learned that they actually belonged to the fortunate few who had managed to survive the blast, and that if they had been in a coastal town, they would definitely have drowned, as it was reported that sea levels had been so high when the impact occurred that even high tower blocks in most cities had been completely covered. Jingfol felt a surge of guilt, remembering the times in the past and how often she had complained about the lack of good shoe shops and eatery in Strandville, and experienced a rare pang of gratitude for being alive. The following night it was David's turn to be formatted, and his inward dread at the thought of it entirely consumed him. Even had there been a feast fit for a king laid out before him, he wouldn't have been able to touch a single morsel, and felt completely indifferent to the fact that the only form of consumption was by means of a daily pill. He wrote what he knew would be one of his last songs and called it The Supermen, in which he wrote, "Where all were minds in unithought, power weird by mystic taught, no pain, no joy, no power too great, colossal strength to grasp a fate, where sad-eyed mermen tossed in slumbers, nightmare dreams no mortal mind could hold. A man would tear his brother's flesh, a chance to die."
Where all were minds in unithought, powers weird by mystics taught, no pain, no joy, no power to right, colossal strength to grasp a fate, where sad-eyed mermen tossed in slumbers, nightmare dreams no mortal mind could hold. A man would tear his brother's flesh, a chance to die, but burn to mold.
The day of his formatting, time seemed to crawl at a snail's pace, and all that day David was not sure how he felt about departing from his emotions forever, and certainly sure he didn't want to, though there was little to nothing he could do about it. In the communal lounge that evening, he bravely got up to walk towards the ominous columns. Jingfo was sobbing openly, but nobody paid her the slightest bit of attention. David kissed her firmly on the forehead and stepped towards his fate. As soon as he disappeared into the right space, everyone was expecting him to be back in a moment as usual. But the columns started flashing lights and a loud siren started going off. The starmen looked at each other in confusion, as if it had never happened before. They lifted their fingers to communicate their puzzlement. "Something seems to have gone wrong," said the prime formatting programmer. The next minute, someone did appear back in the room, but no one except Jingfo recognised him. The stranger had short and pointed straight orange hair and was wearing a type of war paint on his face. His outfit was tight and shiny, with a vertical pattern of wide red and brown stripes, and what looked like bra cuffs stuck on his shoulders. In a slant across his cheek, the word Ziggy was written in red. The starmen were still looking very distressed about the malfunctioning of their precise formatting machine, and said they should hold a brief meeting. Their meetings were nothing like the ones David was used to from his insurance company days. Here only the bare minimum was said, and everyone listened to each other, so that a solution might be found as quickly as possible. While the starmen were plying through their list of possibilities on how best to overcome the problem of the unformattable David, Ziggy came up with a plan. He decided he would tell them it must be down to his ambiguous, creative aura that the machine was going haywire, but that if he walked through it together with Jingfo, they surely would encounter no problems, as only she had the gift of perfectly complementing the lack of balance in his energy levels. David knew that to be able to succeed in this genial endeavour, he would have to totally convince himself that he believed this to be true, as otherwise the starman would read his thoughts. He knew he had the ability to throw himself into a complete instant trance, as he did when he got entirely lost in his music. And that is what he did, until he practically hypnotized himself into believing his statement about the strategy of needing Jingfo at his side in order for the formatting to work. After David had persuaded both himself and the starman that being accompanied by Jingfo was the best and only course of action, he decisively took her hand, and they walked towards the column together. Onlookers in the communal room were looking on with mild interest, having never witnessed the failure of any of the starman's machinery or technology. As soon as they passed through the foreboding line of the formatting machine, Ziggy instantly turned back into David, to Jingfo's great delight. Without having any notion of how they got there, they found themselves inside the pyramid again. A triangular window suddenly appeared on one side of the structure, with 2 chairs for them to enjoy the view, just as a pilot and a co-pilot in an aeroplane would. From the window they could see 3 alarmed starmen in the control room at the centre, pushing at buttons and pulling at levers in a desperate attempt to prevent David and Jingfall's escape. Their view switched from the centre control room to the sea of expressionless faces who were looking on in the communal room and watching them briefly. David decided he had never been privy to a more depressing scene in his life. Although it felt as though they were motionless, their pyramid was obviously moving, as was clear from their window view, and was now hovering directly above the centre. David was sorry he wasn't holding a glass of champagne, so that he could slightly lift it and toast in the direction of the 3 agitated starmen with a cheers gesture. But resignedly accepting the pyramid wasn't Cook's. He was glad that Jingfall childishly stuck her tongue out at him. Planet Earth gradually grew further away. David thought of a line for a song. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do. He inwardly sighed heavily at the thought of the world's fate, and worst of all, that of its remaining inhabitants.